Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to the latest of our webinar series. It's me again, for those of you that have been on the last two. This is actually my final one. For a start, it's half term next week for many of us. And then also Dan's carrying on with some more webinars at the beginning of November. So we're going to keep these going right up until Christmas. So yeah, we've got a variety of them coming up. As this is one that's involving me, it will be quite focused on data. But I'm going to try and make it accessible to non-data specialists as well. So Bruce and I are going to talk a little bit about, how you use data and how you access it, and really the emphasis is on, how it's really used rather than the very technical ins and outs. But we may get a little bit technical at times, but don't worry, because relief will always be just around the corner. Okay. So here are the rules of Agilysys webinars. So please do use the chat function to discuss the topics raised as we go along. They do pop up as notices on my screen, which I just need to try and avoid them, especially if there's any jokes in there, because that can be really off-putting. But if you do have a question, make sure that you start your comment with question, and hopefully in capital letters as well. So it's really easy for Bruce and I to see them as we're going along, and then hopefully we'll try and answer them at the end of the call. So yes, this is being recorded and it will be available to review shortly. And of course, the PDF slides are also going to be available to you. Now, there's some video clips and things in here, so they won't actually make it into the PDF slides, of course. But yeah, so if you do have any questions, we put our email address up at the end. Please do get in touch because we're always happy to help. So here's today's agenda. New ways of accessing road safety data. So we're going to cover some new ways and some perhaps traditional ways. We're going to talk about democratizing data, making sure that people have access to it, first of all. Then Bruce is going to come in and go on his specialist subject, which is around collecting data. I'm then going to run through how people can access some pre-analyzed data, talk a little bit about and setting up an analysis ecosystem, for want of a better word, and then more importantly at the end, do address why sometimes you do need a geek, an anorak, a nerd, however they like to be referred to, hopefully in a jovial way. But yeah, you do need an expert analyst, possibly on call to help you if you're a non-professional. So we'll talk about the kinds of geeks that are available out there. So moving on then, I think it's been pretty clear over the last 18 months that the value of data, its collection, the sharing of that data has never been more important and more well understood by the public, I would say. You know, if you'd said 24 months ago that we'd be having regular briefings and people would be saying next slide please and showing a whole bunch of charts, and we'd have millions of people tuning into that and largely understanding a lot of the data that they're seeing, you'd be quite surprised at that. So we really are back in the age of experts, perhaps. Which includes, scientists, includes health professionals, and hopefully includes some data analysts as well and road safety experts. So I think perhaps the public are more conditioned to having access to information than perhaps they ever have been before. Um, uh, but how do we make sure that people have access to that data? Well, if you think about the coronavirus data, it's been amazing to watch the level of data that's been published on the government website now, so that you can not only see the charts that are used in the presentations, but actually access that raw data, access it via APIs, download the latest daily or weekly figures. And that has in turn led to people doing their own analysis of the information and working out trends and geographical distributions and all that kind of stuff. So I think, it's been, one of the positive things that's come out of the last 18 months has been, I would argue, people engaging much more with data and expecting access to it. So I was on the UK Data Service website and I saw this key phrase really early on, that publicly funded data should be publicly available. And I don't think we disagree with that one too much, subject to the odd caveat perhaps. Um, and you could argue that the UK has been at the forefront of sharing data over the last decade. I mean, I remember when the Freedom of Information Act was brought in, and there was, yeah, I was working in the public sector at the time, and there was terror that flooded through the office of the thought that people would just be allowed access to our data. We spent a long time trying to think of reasons why we shouldn't give it to people, but ultimately, freedom of information has been really good in providing access to information, and not always the information that people would want to see out there. I know that Tony Blair famously described it as one of his worst mistakes. Might have been the Iraq War, but it's definitely allowed more people to have access to data that would have previously been hidden away. And actually, that's led to a change in the way that thinking happens within government. And they've realised that it's much easier just to publish this information than process requests. So you can see an example at the bottom. So if I go into the DFT website right now, I can have a look at all of the DFTs spending over £25,000 for each individual month. And you can see all of the awards that have gone to all the individual companies and what that money's been spent on. And that's been happening for about a decade now. Um, so where can you get access to data? Um, well, there's loads of different places that have sprung up lately. And you've got the main data.gov website, where you can access a lot of the information, and many of us will be used to using that. But then you can have a look at Highways England as well. So Highways England have got an open data website. Then if you have a look at some of the individual local authorities, so London's got a data store, Birmingham's got a data factory. I think perhaps reflecting on the the manufacturing origins of Birmingham rather than London's status as a shopping destination. Also, places like Ordnance Survey have got their own open data hub, so you can now access a lot of that information, and we use that on a very regular basis. Alongside the Open Geography portal, which is a part of Office for National Statistics, and then the UK Data Service as well lists all the different places. So data has opened up. There is so much more available to us now. But what is useful open data? And I think many of us would agree that it needs to be machine readable. That might be a phrase that you've come across, maybe you haven't. But machine readable means something that a computer can read itself. So, for example, here's some information that we've got from some DFT publications. So the one on the left is a PDF document, and you can see that the data has been published and has been made available, and we can read it because we're humans with eyes, but the machine, a computer, can't read that. It can't extract that information. Then we can see an example of one of the DFT's famous RAS forms, so RAS 50,005, vehicles in reported accidents by contributing factor and vehicle type. And this is straight out of Excel. So you would think that's got to be machine readable, hasn't it? But as Bruce will probably be saying and tutting right now, that is not in a machine readable format. It needs to be in a standard way that you can create a database out of. That is just Excel being used to present a chart, a table that's easy for the human to read and understand. So, there are some great examples from the DFT. I don't want to bash them over the head here, but yeah, they've made great strides in recent years to make data more machine readable. So one of those is the road traffic statistics website, where you can go and customize your own data download. So you can go through, many of you will have done this, I'm sure. You can go and click on the different variables, the different outputs that you want. So I've got an example here, which is for Leicestershire. So I chose all of those different things, and as you can see, it's now provided an Excel output for me that is in a machine readable format. It's got the accident year as one column, local authority as another column. It's handily put in those ONS codes, which is good if you want to match to area geographies. We've got road class, and then we've actually got the final count figure at the end, which is fatal or serious. So this is an example of a machine readable data format. And here's another one as well. So this is just a straight CSV file. And this is the CSV file that Bruce was downloading on Friday, I think it was, which is the latest 2020 casualty data and collision data that's all going into crash map, which I think we updated this morning. So yeah, that's another example of machine readable, and it always comes in the same format with the same headings, same titles against those individual columns, which makes it really easy for us to then process those automatically and then put them onto a website like crash map. So that's the kind of data that you want to be looking at. It's not the kind of data that's easy for humans to analyze, but it's the kind of data that makes it really easy for systems to analyze. Okay, right. This is where I take my life in my hands and try and launch a poll. Oh no, sorry, that's the next one. Sorry, I did want to mention APIs as well in here. So APIs, first person to put in the chat what an API stands for wins a hearty round of applause. And APIs are another way of computers getting hold of data from other computers, often without any kind of interaction from us, the humans that gave them life, at all. So this is a really good one via the DVLA developer portal, which is a cracking place to look. And what you can see here is that this is the API called Get Vehicle Details by Registration Number. So you may or may not be aware that you can type this into a government website to find out information about MOTs, for example. But if you program those bits on the left, which is all code, and I'm not a coder anymore, certainly, then that's the kind of result that you will get from it. So you put in the registration number and then it returns all of that information. And this is all publicly accessible, which is fantastic. But you need to make sure that you have systems that can read that information at the end. And the idea with this is that you then don't need to worry about downloading all of the vehicle data for the whole of the UK for 30 million vehicles, 40 million vehicles, whatever it is. You can just access it for the vehicles that you're particularly interested in this case, by submitting a registration number. So that's kind of what an API is, and what it does is it just a better way of going to somebody else's database and then getting the information back for an individual row, rather than having to download the whole thing in a CSV or something like that. So the other one is, you've got all this kind of information available to you. So we've got Stats 19. I think most of you know that this is all available publicly already. The DFT have got all of their traffic count data available for tens of thousands of different road sections across the UK. There's information about road networks that you can get from Ordnance Survey. You can get that area data. So I talked about the Open Geography portal. So that's a really good way of getting access to census level data, some population estimates, if you wanted to know what the latest population estimates were for your local authority area, or maybe within individual wards or boroughs. And then access some of the most recent IMD data if you're looking at information about deprivation and communities. Um, Other information that is available, so you can get national highways. That's Highways England, to everybody else that hasn't quite caught up yet. So you can get their information on flow and speed. It's a little bit awkward, if I'm honest, trying to get hold of it. Trying to get a big bulk download for it is a touch awkward, and I haven't managed to come across that yet. But it is available and you can download it from there, so it is open data. Then you can look at something like Space Syntax. So Space Syntax are actually a company, and what they do is they provide pedestrian maps. And we use this within a couple of our products, which shows you where pedestrians are most likely to be based on, where people live, the types of amenities that they're going to, and it really does show those hot spots within town centres. Thinking a little bit out of the road safety area, as some of us do every now and then, you can also access information from DEFRA. So AQ, that's air quality. We don't say pollution. So air quality information is available for various different types of particulate matter and gases, etc. So you can have a look at that for individual kilometre square grids. You can also access information about noise. So they've already plotted noise around the country and tells you how noisy an individual area is, which is quite useful if you want to move house somewhere and you wondered whether it might be a bit noisy. So yeah, you can have a look at that. It's mostly next to roads, you won't be surprised to hear. But you can also use some crowdsourced data, and the biggest example of that is OpenStreetMap. So that's a road network that isn't Ordnance Survey, but it has some other attributes that are associated with it. But remember, when it's crowdsourced, then it is subject to, the whims and wherefores of the people who are looking after it. And although they do a great job, it isn't normally their profession. So it's not official data. It's there to assist you when communities have gathered together to create it. Um, uh, okay, let me think. If I go on to, just bear with me for a moment. Um, right. Um, So there are other places where you can access data. Now, so this is still titled democratizing data, but I would say that it's made available, but you might have to pay for it. So there are two different places where you can get this kind of data. So these are the two that we're aware of. So the first one is the Esri ArcGIS marketplace. So Esri, they produce GIS software, have spent a lot of effort lately in moving into the cloud and then allowing other people to place data on there so that you can then use it in their kinds of products and solutions. So I've just picked out 6 examples here that I managed to Google and find on their marketplace. So we've got the Waze live alerts layer. So some of you may be aware of Waze. That's the app where people can say there's a traffic jam here, I've just seen a crash, that kind of thing. And then that's available if you want to pay to access to it. There's a travel time add in there if you wanted to look at how, if you're looking at a single central point and say, what's a 10-minute travel time, and what you'd see is a chronopleth. I think that's the word, isn't it? Which is a line that shows you how far you can get in 10 minutes from an individual point. You can see something called the pedestrian frequency atlas, which is actually very similar to the space syntax data that I talked about earlier. Then moving on to the bottom, we've got their WeJo traffic intelligence. This is a big autonomous vehicle data collection company. So they've got lots of information in there about vehicle movements, harsh braking, things like that, mainly over in the States at the moment. I didn't see a lot of it in the UK, but then there's another company as well called Move AI, and they've got a road conditions database in there. So similar kind of information that people might want to have access to. And then we've got something that we've recently put up there as well, which is a route risk analysis for the whole of the road network. So that's pre-analyzed collision data that we've put out there, and then in theory, anybody can buy it or access it depending on the amount of area that they want. So there's lots of these different types of marketplaces available. Another one that we've just become aware of as well is the Here marketplace. So Here are a massive global mapping company that are looking to move into this area as well. So there's some interesting ones up on there. So if you'd like to know where the elk warnings are in Sweden, you can access that information via an API. We've got another company called SensorGrate that has some traffic analytics data, again, looking at traffic jams, things like that. And BMW have got some open source data, which looks quite promising, that includes historic evidence about vehicle breakdowns, harsh braking, that kind of stuff. So yeah, and the fact that they've made that open via a Creative Commons share alike system seems really, really promising. But yeah, we haven't actually had a look at that yet, and just to see whether it covers all of the things that you'd want to know, like whether they've been using their indicators or not. Finally, then, Next Track Data Services, which is again another one of these connected and autonomous vehicle type companies. They do have all of that information on vehicle systems that in theory you can then go and buy and access them. So it's just showing you that there's all this different kind of data that's starting to become made available in theory to road safety professionals that might want to access it. So this is where I wanted to put in the poll. So if you think about all the different types of data that I've just talked about there, which which of those would you most like to access? Now, I'm going to limit you to picking 3 here. So just pick the top 3 or do the top 1. Don't pick 4 or 5 or 6 because that's cheating. So just pick the ones that you like off there. So we've got collision data. Obviously, we've already got collision data, but do you want it more, better, different? The traffic data, so some of the telematics information. Would you like to know where people are cycling, where pedestrians are walking? Driver behavior, so that speeds, harsh data, the information from the vehicles, that would be really good. Are you interested in where people are predicting safety levels, possibly elk related or not? More information, more up-to-date information on population stats and demographics, or road network attributes, so access to information about speed limits on roads, how bendy they are, that's curvature, skid resistance, things like that. So I've had it up for a little while, and let's see if people have been responding in there. So quite a few. Give you all another few seconds to decide which 3, assuming no cheating, you would most like to have. And that's there. So yeah, one thing that I didn't mention at the beginning, so depending on the version of Microsoft Teams that you're on, you might have a different polling experience. For everybody, it's always available in the chat. So you can always go into the chat section. So click on the little speech bubble and you'll be able to see it in there. And that's where you can ask questions, remember, or you might have seen it pop up on the screen in front of you, depending on the type of account that you've got. So the most popular one was traffic data. So it could have been any of those telematics, cycling or pedestrian ones. The next one on the list, is really close, but then driver behavior, speeds, harsh braking and maneuvers. And then better and more collision data. Some interest in those road network attributes, less interest in population statistics and some predicted safety levels. Okay, that's me for the start. So Bruce is going to come along now, and he's going to talk about data apart from Stats 19 and his specialist subject of collecting information. Bruce, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. I finally get a word in edgeways. I was wondering if that was going to happen. My main function here is so that you get to listen to my dulcet Scottish tones for a few minutes. It just breaks up the whole Richard experience a little. And I've got an orange wall, he's got a pink wall. So, it's all change, isn't it? So obviously there's lots of different types of data. Richard's talked there about various national and international places that you can access those different types of data. Generally speaking, I've categorized them into 3 groups, and I'm going to talk mainly about one of those groups. The first of those is data about the network in use. Who the people are, what they're doing, and what the consequences of their behavior are. Generally speaking, the second group, which is your cue to click, Richard. Yay! Demographic data. It was interesting that only 3%, only 4 respondents to the poll there expressed an interest in population statistics and demographics. But if you ignore the people who are using the roads, then you're probably not understanding everything that you need to know about what they're doing. And then the third category is data which effectively has been derived by other people watching what's going on. Real-time data collection, data stimulation of data use, collecting opinions from road users, and looking at the result of academic research and that sort of thing. So that there are a lot of different places that you can get information. But for the purposes of the kind of data we're talking about today, I'm going to talk mainly about collecting data about the network in use. It's all very well having all of this national and commercial data sources available to you, but it probably isn't telling you what you need to know about the places you need to know about. So how do you go about filling that void with local information? Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. PowerPoint. Yeah, the first thing to bear in mind, of course, is that all data has limitations. There is no point in looking at data without being realistic about this. It doesn't come from the same place, and because it doesn't all come from the same place, data sources cannot be expected to be compatible with each other. There's usually a bit of work to do to join the dots and to make the data make sense. I'll talk in a minute about the most important way of going about doing that. Data is always only a limited reflection of the real world. It's never complete. It's only as good as the manner in which you collected it, or the manner in which your agent collected it. And of course, it's not always going to be perfectly fit for your purpose. So when you're looking at a piece of data, think about where it came from, think about why it was collected by the agency that was collecting it. Understand its benefits and its limitations, be realistic about it, and be prepared to do a bit of work to join it up. And don't look on those things as being a reason not to do it. Look on them as being an opportunity to get an insight into what the data can tell you. Okay, Rich, moving on. It's great this, I don't have to click, somebody else does all the hard work for me. I'm going to talk mainly about network and use data, a lot of which is gathered from enforcement activity and from data gathering on the road. That's rather an out-of-date picture of a former colleague of mine from Thames Valley Police doing a bit of enforcement activity. These days, of course, you don't often see serving police officers doing that sort of thing. You're more often going to see automated activity or activity carried out by civilians or members of the general public, and we'll be talking a little bit about that as well. And there's various other ways, of course, you can gather information about what's going on in the road. There's an upside and a downside to collecting this sort of information. Click, please. There we go. The advantage that you get from collecting this kind of information is that you are able to understand what people are doing in the road and what the consequences of them doing it are before the worst happens, before casualties start to happen. You ought to be getting red flags about places you should be aware of, behaviours that you ought to know about, interventions that you ought to be thinking about doing, and you're finding out in advance of the collision happening. Does somebody have to die? They always cry. Hopefully, if you can stay on top of the data, then nobody has to die because you at least have an inkling in advance of what's going to happen. But there is a downside. Click, please, Rich. And the downside is that it is difficult to often to relate information that you collect about the network on use to other sources. And in order to relate the information so it is useful and relevant to what has happened in the past, to what you are doing in the present, and to what you plan to do in the future, it is really important that you acquire secure location data about all of that activity. There's no point in that officer going out there and investing expensive officer resource in doing enforcement if you don't know where he is. No point in nailing those tubes to the road if you don't know where they are. Location is crucial because that's what ties it all together. And if there's one thing to take away when you're collecting data, make sure you've got secure location information. Next slide, please. Location, location, location. Well, there we go. This is a screenshot from one of our applications. This particular one is about deploying speed indication devices, but it could apply to any kind of speed management or network use information. You need to know where it is happening. And I mean where it is happening in two different ways. Firstly, click please. The exact place where it's happening. That blue blob in the middle of that Google map is an exact place where there is a hard standing where a device can be deployed. So we know exactly where it is. There's something else we need to know though. Next click, please. We need to know, generally speaking, what route, what road is this activity happening on, because we don't just want to relate it to the exact place where it's happening, we want to relate it to other things that are happening nearby, which from the point of view of road users is all part of the experience of using the same road. So whenever you're gathering information, and we're about to look at some examples of the kind of information you might be gathering, make sure you get location, both exactly where it is and more generically what route it's on. Next slide, please. I wish I hadn't put such a slow transition on this. So you can see that I've got a slide here with there's various different types of data that you might have access to, or that other agencies that you are working with might have access to, and that almost certainly somebody somewhere has access to, if only you could find that somebody, that is probably relevant if you can relate it together. Inventories. So what's the road surface like? What street furniture is present? Is there a median? How is the median controlled? And you should be able to get surveys that mean that you get up-to-date inventories in the ideal world. All kinds of ways that you can do that. Click, please. Of course, obviously, traffic counts. We've talked about the fact that DFT has a number of permanent traffic counts. Most local authorities have traffic counts. Strategic road authorities do that. You can also add temporary counts that you're doing because you're surveying about a particular intervention or a particular location where there's a concern, but there isn't an ongoing need. For those temporary and manual counts, recording location is particularly important. Click, please. Speed management activity, we talked about police enforcement, but community engagement in speed management is also very important. And where members of the community are doing things to help make their communities more livable, it's important that we gather the information about what they are doing, not only because we want to keep track of the activity itself, but also because there's useful intelligence for us that augments formal enforcement activity, but we can only do it if we know where it is. Next up, he's getting the hang of this now. He clicked before I asked. The lad's got promise, I would say. CCTV and traffic cameras and such like things. You can get information, for example, near miss events from those. I'm going to talk about a more specific example of that in a minute. It's another way in which you can gather data. As long as you know where it was from, what its provenance was, you can do something with it. And one more click. Maintenance inspections. Do you know about crash barriers that have needed to be repaired? What you've got right there is information about an event that you might otherwise have missed altogether. This sort of thing is commonly collected, for example, by national highways and by highway authorities, and it can be put to great use. Okay, next slide, please, Rich. So all of those are different data types. Just to have a look at a couple of specifics. Enforcement data, for example, here is a motorcyclist doing something that he definitely, I'm saying he, I'm pretty sure, definitely shouldn't be doing. And if you click on that, Rich, we can see the extent to which he definitely shouldn't be doing it. 157 miles an hour is fairly eye-watering. So what information should we be gathering about that event? If you click, Rich, there is some information about this event that is in a machine-readable format. Yeah, so we've got the key information about what's been going on at that site in order to control activity like that. When it was happening, how long it was happening for, and what the consequence of the activity was. And if you just click another couple of times, Rich, you see the key thing. We know how long, we know what happened. And when you aggregate information like that over a long period of time, you can get a very clear idea of what kind of thing usually happens at that location. And if you have the location located to a route and you've got several locations along the route, you can build up a picture of what's happening along the route. The key is to collect the information with a known location and to collect it in a machine-readable format. If you click on Rich, here's a very good example of information that has been collected with connection to a location. This is the Scottish Borders Council, the way that they expose their traffic speed survey results. So we've got a specific location, and you can see that all of the surveys over a period of time at that location have been aggregated together. And if you click on Rich, you can see we've got the two key things. We've got a location, we know exactly where we are, and if you click again, we know exactly what happened at that location. So that's an example of the output that you can get as long as you collect the information, bearing in mind the two key things. Do I have the location? Is it machine readable? And if you're picking up your information in that format, then even if you don't have the wherewithal to do anything with it in the short term, you will have the ability to do something with it in the long term, especially if you have the right sort of geek, which is something Richard will come back and talk about. One more example, if you click on, Rich. This is the example I was talking about CCTV. Here you've got an example of an old design of a pedestrian crossing and a new design for a pedestrian crossing. This one has been in the news recently, you may well have seen it. And what you've got there is lines delineating different parts of the pedestrian crossing. To evaluate the new intervention, we need to look at who is crossing those lines when, both in terms of vehicles and in terms of pedestrians. So we understand how road users reacted to the way that the road used to be and the way that the road is now. And how do we do that? If you click, please, Rich, you'll see we're taking advantage of CCTV that's present at the site. Draw lines on the CCTV and we can automatically collect the data about who is crossing those different lines. And therefore we know whether or not road user behaviour has been changed. And that's a good example of how to collect data in a reasonably automated way that will give you invaluable information about what's going on at a site. Okay, if you click on, Rich, I think I just wanted to finish off by mentioning the existence of national data sources. By and large, if you can collect your own local data in a way which is machine readable and coherent to the location, you'll get something that's useful, and you can then regard the national data sources that Richard was talking about earlier as being your backup if all else fails. But you will have overall averages across local authority district areas for traffic and for different kinds of traffic and for different kinds of road, and there's the national count point data. It is important to be aware of the demographics of your area and also the demographics of people who use your network. So, for example, if you're doing community speed watch and you've connected the VRMs to the registered keepers of the vehicles, you have the demographics of the people who are exceeding the limit on the roads where that activity has been happening. And even though there isn't any direct enforcement of those people, that's telling you something important about the kind of people and the kind of way that they behave on your network. If you click on down that slide, got a couple more examples of national data that it's useful to have. Qualitative demographics that allow you to look at those people not only in terms of where they come from, but what they're like. And of course, driver and vehicle licensing data will tell you what kinds of vehicles are being used and something about the demographics of the people who own them. So all of those things can give you backup information, but the most important thing is to collect the information that you want from the place that you want it. Okay, Rich, I'm going to pass back to you now, and we'll carry on. Pre-analysed results. Tell me more.
Thanks, Bruce. I think I will. I was getting slightly paranoid there that nobody was in the chat, but Brian and Paul have joined in now, so that's making me feel good. Okay, so wouldn't it be easier if you had all the hard work done for you? That'd be great, wouldn't it? So if you get some pre-analyzed data, so if you're a member of the public, wouldn't it be great if somebody pre-analyzed all the road safety data for you? If you're a stakeholder and you're sharing information, if you're giving information to a politician, wouldn't it be good if it was all pre-analyzed, passing information to managers and also giving information to non-technical road safety experts? And I think actually most people who work in road safety get data, get the importance of it, perhaps don't understand, all the technical ins and outs of how you process it, because that's not their job. Their job is doing something else in road safety, designing an education campaign or something like that. So let's just talk a little bit about some examples of pre-analyzed results. So this is slightly where I hope that the video is just going to start playing. And it doesn't do that. Was the video playing? Did anybody shout? I may need to go to my backup plan, which would be to... No video, I'm afraid, says Steve. Everybody, give me half a minute and I will make this work by bringing it up on another screen and putting it in there. And I'll pause that. and instead share this screen, which should be that one. Wrong screen. Close.
So that's what his desktop looks like.
Ah, there we go. Right. Now, somebody type away if they don't see this video playing now. So hopefully you can see that this is the DFT's new online data dashboard that they've created, which is in Power BI. I'm hoping that it's playing. And yeah, it's an example of a tool that many of you have accessed in the past. You can see the video. Yes, great news. And yeah, you can click through various different filters, which allow you to specifically stop down the amount of information that you've got, or you can click on individual charts and then explore the metrics associated. So I've just chosen the serious adjusted data, and then I've had a look at anybody under the age of 16, looked at females, and you can see that all of the related charts are then changing at the same time. So yeah, you can hopefully go through and then see that it's got, you know, all that information about number of females in there. And actually, if you have a look at the casualties by road type, you can see it's actually missing one number in there, which means that one of the road types probably wasn't coded correctly. So let's have a look at the next one. And I'm just going to assume that this is playing now and everything's working. So here's an example of some more Power BI dashboards. So here's one that Somerset have done. So Somerset Intelligence. There we go. No stores or warehouses or anything like that. Just straight up Somerset Intelligence. So again, Stats 19 data. You know, it's a data set that lends itself very well to this kind of BI approach. But as you can see in this one, it's got some maps built into it as well. So you can start to see the locations of the individual collisions. And actually, Power BI, though it is limited in some ways, does allow you to filter the map based on the selections that you make in the individual charts. So you can see that this one's now allowing you to select the collisions based on the individual road that was mentioned, or you can filter based on the individual speed limit. And, you know, that's working pretty well. And I think you'd agree, you know, having that information available as a public service, available to councillors, members, etc., is really good. Here's another one from Devon County Council, from the Queen of Power BI, Marie Waltman. So this one I really like because it just works so easily. It's really clear, really set out quite well. It just looks like a simple chart, but actually the interactivity works. You know, really nice design layout there. So yeah, there's an example of some work that's been done in the Southwest. In terms of other kinds of tools that you can use, here's one of you that many of you that are MAST members will recognise. So this is one of our headliners that's been designed and created by Craig. And this is where we try and take all of the data and the power that sits behind MAST, but then pre-analyze it for people. So you can see on this one here, it's allowing people to compare collision rates for pedal cycles within the individual areas of Manchester. Then if you wanted to go and have a look at small areas, so these are output areas, so I think lower super output areas, you can now see, you know, the darker colors are showing the highest risk, and that's based on the residency. So it is pre-analyzed information, so you don't need to match postcodes. This one is just some simple heat mapping if you wanted to see the locations of those pedal cyclist crashes. So something that many of you are more familiar with, of course. And then we've got some hour of day, which is a time of day analysis, but then also bringing in some of the mosaic profiling that we've done on the past. We tried to do this so that it's all available in a single solution, that it's easy for people to go onto, so they don't have to remember all of Bruce's training on mass that they learned many years ago, and which dimensions to include and all those kinds of things. So trying to pre-process the information for the road user groups that people are most likely to want to analyze. Now, all of that one has actually been programmed in R. So we're going to talk a little bit about R in a moment. If you're thinking about another solution, so here is the PACTS constituency road safety dashboard. So this is a bit like, many of the solutions that you've seen already, but this one's using a specific data set that PACTS have been working on for about the last couple of years. And instead of just talking about the types of road users that are injured, what it does is it includes information on who struck that road user. So, if it's a pedestrian or a pedal cyclist, it's the vehicle that struck them. And then you can see that information included on the right hand side. So, it's got some little graphics there which show the symbol for the vehicle and then the counts. And, it works in the same way that many of these things do, is that in that you click on an individual bar and then the information just filters on the map, and you can see that the counts on the right hand side change, and you can click on a number of those filters to Hark's content. And yeah, there we go. So another example where you can start to click through onto pedal cycles. These kinds of online tools are really useful as well if you want to share lots and lots of data that might require quite a complex platform. So this is a network analysis one. So this is looking at 87,000 different road segments within Surrey, and this is looking at speeds of vehicles. So comparing speeds of vehicles using telematics data, which is a data set they have access to, against the speed limit information. So you can see with some simple filters on here, you can then look at the ones that have got the biggest speeding problem, and then zoom in and have a look at the individual section of road, click on that, and then start to see the details. So we can see that this one in the off-peak period, yes, 30.1 mile per hour average speed. So yeah, it just ticked over into that area of non-compliance. So yeah, there's some examples of some tools that are out and about there. I'll make sure that when I do share the slides for this, that I include the links in there so that you can see them. Okay, right. Back to the presentation slides, hopefully. And zoom back across to where we were before. It's nice when technology works sometimes. So we're going to talk a little bit now about analysis ecosystems and what you might want to include in them. So here's my map of the 4 different things that I think you may want to have within your own analysis ecosystem. So data, we spent a lot of time talking about data here already. So the information that's in files. So, think about a CSV file or an Excel file or something like that. Files that may exist within a database. So SQL Server, lots of other databases are available, probably not Microsoft Access though. And then APIs. So we've talked about application programming interfaces already. So you need to think about where your data comes from. Is it stored in a different system already? So if it is, how are you going to get that out? Are you entering it directly into something? So, Bruce mentioned some of those portals that we've been working on where people enter in the number of offences detected at an individual speed camera site. Can you collect it via an API? So if you had something that was using the vehicle registration mark, could you then go onto that DVLA API and then collect some more information about the colour of the vehicle or something else that you didn't, whether it had an MOT, that kind of thing. Are you going to have to manually export data from another system that perhaps you don't have control over? Then where are you going to store that? Are you going to store that in your own data warehouse? So a data warehouse isn't a folder on your hard drive. A data warehouse is something that is a little bit more robust than that. Is it an offline database? Maybe within an application that you already have or that somebody's provided for you, or is it cloud-based, which is obviously the way that a lot of data storage has been moving over the last few years. So once you've got the data, you need to think about how you're going to process those results. So that might be network area matching. You maybe do some calculated values or running stored procedures. So when you're bringing in some data, arguably the first thing that you should be doing is some data validation. Has the data schema changed? Does it look right? Does it feel right? All those kinds of things. Does it process through properly? Do you need to do this in an offline kind of way? Is this something that happens on individual computers? Are you doing it on a central server? Something like that. Are there going to be options for interactive on the fly processing where it's done almost as people access the information? That tends to be much rarer. You can do that with some route plotting data, for example. Do you have a wrap? and that's a reproducible analytical pipeline. So, is there a defined process in place by which you process that data so that it's always, quick and easy? It's always done exactly the same way, and you know that it's going to give you the right results. And have you documented that, or are you the only person in your organization that knows how to process any of this stuff? Really important if you're ever thinking about leaving an organization. And then QA. So no, not questions and answers, but quality assurance. Do you go right back and have a look at the original data and make sure that once you've been through all that processing, that the results are actually right? Um, so then delivering the user modules to people, we've shown a lot of different web technologies at the moment: maps, charts, data exports. Do you use SaaS, so software as a service? Power BI is software as a service. It's a piece of software that exists in the cloud that you can then put your own data into and then create your own charts and things like that. So that's what software as a service means. Or is it a bespoke solution that you would pay a developer to create for you, or that you might create yourself? Um, and then, once you've defined the kind of tools that you're going to be using, what kind of interactivity do your users want? Not just that you want, but what kind of interactivity do they really need? Does it need multi-filtering? So that's one of the things that Power BI doesn't do. You can't click on one chart and then click on another chart because it just removes the filter. That's why you have to have that separate list of filters to include those. Can you save layouts for end users as well? How much interactivity should you have in your maps? Should they just be maps that look nice? Should you be able to click on them and see more information? Do you want different map layers to interact with each other? Now that's quite a challenging one. And that requires some kind of more advanced technologies. So the idea that you could click on an area and then it automatically filtered the roads, for example, that's the kind of interactivity that we're talking about there. And then actually, is there really a requirement to go and export that for something else? So if you're creating this analysis ecosystem and somebody says, well, I actually need to put it in this spreadsheet every month for this report that I'm writing, sometimes you need to consider those kind of user requirements. And finally, security and access. Have you got the right permissions? Have you considered license costs as well? Power BI is really good at public accessibility. You've seen them. I've accessed a load of them publicly. How much password protection is required for the end user? So you can do that, but one of the problems when you put in password protection is normally they start charging licensing fees for that, and that can add up quite quickly. Have you got any licensed data in there? So if you've got some information from one of these many data warehouses that you've had to pay for, how do you control access to that? Because you don't accidentally want to be exposing somebody else's data to the entire world. Are you including any personal data? So stats 19, text descriptions, for example, you wouldn't want to accidentally start publishing those, would you, if it was containing perhaps personally disclosive information? And then, of course, with all of this, you've got all of the management considerations. Are you taking regular backups of this, both of the software as well as the data? Do you actually need to have an SLA in place? Something we need to consider if you're providing that as a service for somebody. And then how scalable is it? Are you going to find that the solution that you've created doesn't really scale nicely and you have to go back to the drawing board? So many of those questions you'll be able to answer. Some of those questions you might need a geek for. So here's our pet geek. It's not our pet geek, just somebody that I found on the internet. And data is meaningless without understanding. So you don't just need the data geek in the bunker there just used to processing information. They need that understanding, and that means that the end user has got to provide clear specifications. And it may be that many of the people on this call are end users, the people that want access to the information. You need to make sure that you clearly communicate that to your pet geek. Now, these days, technological barriers are much lower. You don't need to be able to program things yourself. There's lots more software as a service that's available. But then equally at the same time, coding is becoming more important. So let's just do a quick run through of the top 3 types of geek that you might be interested in. So do you want a data scientist? Somebody who's got great coding skills, who can use R or Python. So there's a really good link to a report there that the RAC Foundation has created that tells you, people out there, how to do road safety research using R. But the barrier is reasonably high. You need to be quite competent for this kind of thing. And it's great for processing data if it's stored appropriately, and you can use it to create these wraps. And even at the end of it, you can create some data visualization and tools as well. Even if it's just some standard pie charts, you know that it's always going to go through the same process. So the next other kind of geek that you might be able to have is a business intelligence analyst. So this could be somebody who has really good understanding of data structures. They could be using a mixture of desktop applications and online software as a service. So I've got ArcGIS Online there, Power BI, Tableau, that's another one. So it's easier to use for somebody who's just quite data savvy and is used to, if they're a top Excel person, they should be able to use a lot of these things. They've got plenty of useful standard features, but you're always going to come across a barrier somewhere along the line where you couldn't quite do the thing that you wanted to. And remember that it may well incur those licensing costs as well. Or do we just have somebody who's really good at using proprietary systems? So this is how I started, that's for sure. I was somebody who was reasonably good at using Excel, and then I was introduced to AxMap, so Buchanan Computing, as an example up there. Very much related to an absolute requirement for the end user, bespoke pieces of software carrying out individual tasks. Basemap do some solutions that are around network monitoring, journey management, and that kind of stuff. And then, of course, Mast Online is a solution that's easy for somebody to use. You don't need to upload data to it. It's there. As long as you've got the training, then you can access it. Is that the kind of geek that's going to be enough for you within your team? So let me just launch that poll and see which one you prefer. So this is a single choice. If you could have anybody new to come into your team right now, who would you want? Would you want a data scientist? Would you want a business intelligence analyst, or would you just want a really competent road safety or transport specialist? I see the responses coming in. Ooh, getting close. Hopefully, technically, this webinar has gone reasonably well. We did have a slight hiccup at the moment. Some of my slides evaporated for a second or two and then came back. But hopefully, yeah, it's been okay. 29 responses. Just wait for one more. Come on, let's hit 30. 31. That'll good. That'll do. And it's very close, but I think I'm going to click done on there now. So you should be able to see the results. Oops. So we had 48% of people that wanted a data scientist, 35% who wanted a road safety or transport specialist, and 16% who wanted a business intelligence analyst. So that's one sitting somewhere between the two. And there's no reason why your road safety transport specialist couldn't also be good at BI as well. So that was everything that we had planned to talk about. We have taken an entire hour of your time. I hope you found most of it enjoyable. Just having a look at any of the questions that came through. Yes, we did have one question that came through. So if you did want to type in another one now, you can do. Bruce, you've unmuted yourself.
Provide an answer. By the way, I'm told that people can't see me, Rich. They can only see you, which is obviously, their loss. But so everybody out there, those of you who haven't met me, I hope you can imagine me. I've got a little bit of an answer for the question that was posed, which is quite an interesting one. Given the importance of machine-readable data, should there be some basic design guides for standard data sets? I think the problem with basic design guides is people would probably ignore them before breakfast, people being what they are. But I thought it might be useful just to give people a few quick basic principles of, if you are collecting data and you want to make sure it's going to be useful and machine readable, here are 4 things that I'm going to paste into the text, into the chat, that I think it would be really useful for you to bear in mind. If you are collecting data, here's 4 things to try and make sure that it does. Try and make sure your data set starts with a single row of unique headings. That those tables that you download in Excel from the DFT that Richard was talking about earlier, one of the reasons they're not machine readable is because they've got fancy headings inherited from back when Road Safety Great Britain was a book. Yeah, start with a single row of unique headings. If you want to convey information, then have a list of codes and enter the code in the data rather than using free text. It's always going to be more useful like that in the long run. If it's a number, let it be a number. Don't mix it up with symbols. So we don't want pound signs or km for kilometers or anything like that. If it's a number, just leave it as a number, pure and simple. And don't forget to record the location. And if you have a template for collecting data and you follow those principles, you'll be doing yourself or somebody else further down the line, or your pet geek even, quite a big favour.
Yeah, I hope you all got your pet geeks. Yeah, I've had a couple of questions come through now. So Stuart's asked, how do you go about designing, understanding what kind of data warehouse environment you might need within your business? So, I mean, within our business, we've designed lots of different data warehouses and environments. So, you know, Bruce created the mother of all data warehouses when he created Mast. Which took a very, very long time to produce. And that was okay because we had a lot of time to do that. That was within SQL Server. We used the technology that was cutting edge at the time. So it included SQL Server analysis services and SQL Server reporting services, as well as a front end from a Canadian BI company. And largely now a lot of those things have disappeared. SQL Server is still there because it's a great database. Other ones are available, of course, but data visualization, etc., has moved on. So you do need to constantly be aware of the different tools and techniques. But you know, always sitting at the heart of it is a good database, isn't that right, Bruce?
Yeah, you would have certainly used Azure technology, for example, had it been available at the time to use Mast. So the right answer to that question definitely changes over time. And if your design is going to be robust for the long term, the most important thing is to make sure that it's uh, theoretically sound and as far as possible, somewhat independent of the platform that it's on, because development and time being what it is, sooner or later, you're going to have to port it from one environment to another. So the sounder it is in principle, then the easier that migration will eventually be.
Yeah, and the great thing about the database there is it sits on a server that's in the cloud, but the visualization of it could be done by any kind of new software that comes along. Question from Lloyd on there, which is why was there a filter of speed limit at 80 miles per hour? And I think that comes down to a bit of quality assurance there within the Stats 19 data. Somebody somewhere will have put in a speed limit of 80 and it wasn't cleansed within the data and is now appearing in Power BI for everyone to see. Is that what you
If
think happened, Bruce?
Yeah, if you use Mast as your data source, of course, things like that will not happen because we do have data cleansing built into the import process. But yes, you're almost certainly right. There are any number of integers. I actually have a list of them somewhere of every bizarre number that's been entered into a Stats 19 speed limit field since 1979. And it's pretty much every integer between 0 and 100.
That's how Bruce rolls. That's great. Yeah, one thing that I would say is police officers or anybody typing in a form is prone to fat fingers and thumbs. And the best way to actually get some of this information is to use a third-party data source or something like that, not just rely on the data that's being collected, especially if the speed limit may have changed. That does start to get a little bit more complicated, and that's where we're talking about some of the network infrastructure information. So I think that's all of the questions. Thank you for everybody that turned up. Thanks to Bruce for joining in. Sorry you couldn't see him. As I said, we do have more webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks. Please do go onto the website. Everybody that's been on this will get an email through in the next couple of days, letting you know when the recording's available, and hopefully you found it enjoyable. Please do get in touch with either myself, Bruce, or any of the team if you do have any questions. But yeah, have an enjoyable afternoon. Thank you.